Welcome back, everyone, to the Integral European Conference. And I'm so happy to be warmly welcoming Terri O'Fallon to talk today and in this moment about developmental confusions. And this really is her life's work coming together for us today. Terri is a partner in Stages International. She's a researcher and has been teaching for 45 years, in fact, more than 45 years. She's a coach, a spiritual director, and a designer of transformative containers and programs. Terri does ongoing research on the Stages developmental model, which supports 4 later levels of development. So today we're going to talk about the developmental stages that we all grow up through in our lives, but most of us don't realize that at each stage we encounter at least one distinctive confusion. And so in order to move to that next stage, we have to stare that confusion in the face and untangle it. So this session is going to take us through the developmental confusions at each stage, from birth through the Illumined stage. That's the latest stage that they have research on. And we're going to do that by having some discussion groups, a few exercises and meditations to guide us through these perplexing unconscious confusions. And as Terri says, threading us through the eye of the needle at each stage. So Terri, I'm going to hand it off over to you. And there you go.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your introduction, Gabriel. That's very, very refreshing to hear those words. I know that I wrote them, but I can't even remember what I said. So, I mean, this is a good introduction. I wanted to remind everybody that this week, Pentecost has arrived. And Pentecost is about, all of the languages coming up at once and people being able to understand each other in those languages. And it seemed so appropriate to me that this IEC conference would come up during the Pentecostal season, since we have 54 or 55 countries with all these different languages, and we're trying to communicate with each other. And what a blessing it is to have a very old traditional celebration match what we're doing here today and this week. I also wanted to say something about the Stages model before we start, and all models, and how the Stages model actually occurred to me. I was in a retreat with Father Thomas Keating, and during that retreat, this model just dropped into my consciousness. I did not make this model up, so I do not consider this model to be mine. It is something that I've tried to caretake through the years, that I've been devoted to, and sometimes I've forgotten that it isn't mine, and have gone off on all kinds of interesting excursions. But ultimately, this model has been a life's work for me. In addition to that, though, I've had to recognize over the years that models are for support, and they're not who we are. Models are to help us, not to tell us who we are. They're to give us some guidance in one way or another, and there's hundreds of models out there, and it's important that you pick the models that support you. And that's a very, very important insight, I think, that we can all have. We can be devoted to a model and let it tell us who we are. That's not going to work very well. And we can also project our own beliefs on the model and change the model according to our beliefs. And our beliefs really end up being different truths along the way, so as they grow up. So I'm hoping for all of you that are here that the model will be of service to you, that will give you some tips, some insights about yourself, and wanted to remind you from the beginning that it is not going to tell you who you are, but maybe it will be of help to you along the way. So that's the most important thing that I wanted to bring up. So I'm going to start with the concrete tier, and we're going to be looking at babies. Now, we don't know whether babies have beliefs or not, but there's certainly some confusions that go on there. So I'm going to share my screen and give you a little bit of information about the concrete tier. Then we'll go into the subtle tier. That's the tier that most of us live and reside in. And then I'm going to go into the meta-aware tier, which is very, very rare. But I have research, quantitative research on all of these stages, and I also have done qualitative research on all of these stages. So what I'm speaking about with confusions today has some research around it, and yet there are things in each of these stages that fall outside of any research. And I'm aware of that too. So if you don't resonate with these, you may be one of those people who just have their own version of this stage, and so I celebrate that with you. Okay, so let me share my screen. All right. So I'm using a spiral because the spiral seems to fit many, many of our developmental models. So this one was done by Gaia, and she has allowed us to use this spiral as in our teaching. So we're very, very grateful to her. And we start at the very beginning with babes in utero, and this is where their senses develop. Their senses are actually in quite amazing capacity, even before people are born, even before babies are born. And once they are born, we have, in this model, we have the developmental levels that they go through from birth until as late as the research that we have we'll be talking about today. So I wanted to share just a little bit about the actual repeating patterns that happen here, because you will see these repeating patterns in the confusions. So we have a concrete tier, and all the objects in this tier are concrete. You know, you can touch them, you can smell them, you can see them with your concrete senses. Then we have this subtle tier, and those objects are all very subtle, like complex adaptive systems, you know, goals and objectives, things like that. And then we have the meta-aware tier, where awareness of awareness actually starts coming up. So then we have our social dimensions. It's all about me, it's individual, or it's all about we, it's collective. And those repeat at each tier. And then we have our learning patterns, how we learn. We start out with being receptive. A baby can't do anything but just receive. Then they figure out who they are. They become quite active. Then they start wanting friends, so they become reciprocal. And then we have an interpenetrative stage. And you may notice that 1.0 has these three parameters: concrete, individual, receptive. And that's what we sometimes call impulsive. But if we go up to this subtle tier, we have subtle, individual, receptive. It's identical, except that the objects are subtle. And then we have meta-aware, individual, receptive. It's identical, except that the objects are now really very, 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 very subtle awareness of awareness objects. And this is what allows us to see these repeating patterns. And you'll notice these repeating patterns in the confusions. So we'll go from there to this beautiful little shining, bright-eyed baby that is completely receptive. And what is the confusion of a child this age? Well, they confuse their self with other phenomena. They don't even know they have a self. They can't even ask the question, who am I? Because they don't know that there's an I to seek. But one of the very big things that contributes to the confusions in the concrete tier is that the interior senses have not yet developed, so they can't visualize at this stage of development. And this is something that we build with our children naturally. So this next little video, I'm just going to show a portion of it, but you will notice that as soon as the dad is out of sight, the dad is also out of this child's mind. So we'll look at this video, and watch to see what happens. So watch where the baby is paying attention. And
okay, so we're playing a little game of peekaboo with Emmett. Let's see how he does. All right, buddy. Here we go.
Dad is gone. He's nowhere.
Oh, did I surprise you? Should we do it again? All right, here we go. Here we go.
Dad is gone, out of sight, out of mind. Okay, I want you to reflect a little bit while we're waiting for this on, did you notice that this little child, the minute Dad was out of sight, he stopped squealing and that is when children learn to visualize, they actually don't have they don't stop like that. They know that their dad is there, even when their dad is out of sight. When the mother goes into the kitchen, they don't cry because the mother's gone. They know the mother's just around the corner. You have to be able to visualize to see that. And visualizations come through these confusions all of our lives. So here's another little video, and I will share my screen again to show what happens as a little baby begins to get a little bit more mature at this particular stage. Okay, now this one shows that a child still isn't quite able to visualize. He's not able to connect things. So as you watch, you'll see that this little child still doesn't have a self. So you can see the confusion there with that little child, how confused that child was, because they can't really tell who they are. They don't recognize themselves in a mirror, and that's one of the areas. So that confusion is a confusion that gradually clears up, and the child has the capacity to see that they have a self, that their self is not, their self is separate from all phenomena. And that's when they move into this 1.5 concrete, individual, active, egocentric stage. So let's take a look at what happens at the next stage. So these children can visualize now. Once they can visualize, they start confusing visualization with reality. So that's a big confusion for them. And notice this. Let's see if I can get this to play.
No, the last one. But going down is okay.
He's talking to somebody.
I always stop that here and no branch here, so you can hold this rock to do the big rock when we're there. Well, it's not halfway, but I'm going to reach it.
Okay, so this lets you see that they are visualizing a playmate out there. They're talking to it, they're playing with it, and they are having a really good time with their imaginary playmate. They're talking to somebody, but that somebody is in their imagination, but to them, that is real because they can't tell the difference between their visualization and what their eyes are seeing. And oftentimes, imaginary playmates show up at that point, and because they show up, they will often say that their imaginary playmate is a real playmate. And I can actually remember myself having an imaginary playmate when I was younger. Now, the second thing that they confuse is what is yours and what is mine, and you'll get that on this video. I'm just going to play a few videos so you can see this stage is very vibrant. So you can see what happens when two people think the same thing belongs to them. At this stage, everything belongs to you because you don't know that there is more than that other people own things. So the confusions that you have at this stage become very over-encompassing. So they confuse truth with lies. It's their truth, and other people may call their truth a lie. So we have to be careful what we project on these children. So if you, let's just try to stand into these little 1.5 egocentric children's, into their experience and into their own beliefs and into their own what they see. If you believe that everything is yours, which these children do, and if you take something, are you stealing? Most adults will look at little children like this, and if they take something out of this store, they'll say, you can't steal. But for the child, they don't know they're stealing. They don't have a sense of what is yours and mine yet. And then if the child denies they're stealing, are they really lying? Would you say that, could you steal something that's your own? So we have these kinds of confusions happening, and parents and adults often look at what they should know, and yet at the same time, what they should know and what they do know is something very different. So if you believe that your visualizations are real, are you lying about your imaginary friend? Well, I know that I've seen parents say, oh, that's not really real, is it, honey? And the child will insist, yes, it's real, you know. That's what the child can actually see. In this particular case, the child will recognize that I can see you, but you can't see me. So they will put their hands over their eyes and say, you can't see me, or they will, if somebody says, I can see you when you're playing hide and go seek, they will say, you can't see me, because they do not know that other people can see them yet. Everything belongs to me in this belief system because there isn't a you yet. There's only a me. And so this is a confusion they have to get over in order to get to the next developmental stage. So now we're going to go into 2.0, concrete, collective, reciprocal. So now we've got reciprocity going on. And we have a collective stage. So we'll move into that and see what kind of confusions happen here. Well, this is the rule-oriented stage, and you can't get rules until you understand that there's another person out there. And they begin to notice that the other person out there can see them. They have this capacity to turn their visualizations onto somebody else, step into somebody else's shoes and look back at them. Now that's a very complex capacity. But their language really gets confused because pronouns come up for the first time for them. Now, pronouns are particularly difficult because before this time, every object they have is actually an object that has a label to it, and the label sticks to the object. So if you have a tree, it can be any particular kind of a tree, but a tree is always a tree, a chair is always a chair, a car is always a car, etc. But a me is not always a me, and a you is not always a you. Because when I'm talking to you, I'm a me and you're a you. But when you're talking to me, I'm a you and you're a me. This is very, very confusing because the objects, the labels do not stick to the objects here. And children get very confused about this. And sometimes they'll talk about somebody else's, they'll call somebody else by their name and they'll call themselves by their name until they can figure out these confusing pronouns. And that's something that is a very important thing for them to learn and to understand. So now we're going to get into the fourth one. And this is a stage where usually it's a high school stage where they are at the conformist level. They have formal operations, and yet it is a collective stage again. So this is where they confuse the individual with the collective. So they might say, okay, we're questioning authority, but everybody has a question authority t-shirt. Everybody has this exact same cell phone. Everybody has the same haircut. Everybody is wearing the same clothes. And they conform to the culture of the people that they're in, and they can't tell the difference between their own independent thoughts and the thoughts of the culture or the group that they identify with, because they're conformists. So they do have an individual identity, but they don't know it. They don't know the difference between their individual identity and this collective. So that is a big confusion that they have to get over. So let's talk a little bit, just a little bit of a summary of the first four confusions, and then we're going to go into a room where I'm going to ask you to do an exercise together and come back then. 1.0 confuses the self with all concrete phenomena. They can't tell themselves from anything else. 1.5, which is the egocentric, they confuse their visualization with reality. They can't tell the difference between their visualization of an imaginary playmate and themselves. Everything that they visualize, they think is already real. And they confuse yours and mine, which is ownership. Everything out there I own because it's mine, and they don't know that there's a yours yet because they don't know there's a you yet. They confuse truth with lying. That's what we put on them. And remember that we can project on our children our views, and we would say that they are lying. They would never say they're lying because to them, what they see is what the truth is. And that is true of every single developmental level. What we see and what we experience and what our perspective is the truth. And we won't see a later truth because we would not yet have experienced it. So oftentimes we think about people lying. You can't see me is another area. You can't see me. Confuses pronouns me and you. And they confuse at 2.0, like we just went through, and then they confuse the individual and the collective at 2.5. So those are the four areas of our confusions when we are at the concrete tier, and children up through about age, average age maybe 18 or 19. These are the kinds of confusions that they have. So we want to pick one of the four stages and their confusions and be in a conversation with each other. Then I want you to, in your group, just pick one of the four stages, and then I want you to have a conversation with each other from the viewpoint of that stage and speak the truth of that level in your conversation. Spend a few minutes and just see if you can can get an idea of how it feels for these 4 different levels to communicate with one another, and whether or not you would connect from these 4 levels, and then go ahead and debrief that. So that's what I'd like to have you do in your breakout groups.
Excellent. So Brian is going to set you up into rooms. Of course, it's optional if you want to join. So go ahead and click to join the breakout group if you like, or click later to stay in here.
And we will be doing the subtle tier next. And then I'll have an exercise for you to do in the subtle tier and the meta-aware tier after that.
We can have a little conversation here if you like, if you have any.
Yes, I'd love to answer any of your questions and any observations that you might have. I kind of sped a little fast through those stages because we took so much time trying to get the Prezi going. So I hope that you could get enough about it that you understand. So any questions or thoughts about any of the confusions that we have at the concrete tier?
Feel free to unmute yourself. I just want to double check, Terry, how much time do we have for this?
Well, we have an hour and a half.
I meant for this breakout portion.
Oh, 10 minutes.
10 minutes, great. Yeah, David, you have a question?
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. The levels of development can just absolutely fascinate me. Of course, I love Ken Wilber's full model, including the AQUAL quadrants. And I'm just seeking to develop this in myself and be able to use it in service of others.
Well, great. I'm glad to hear that. And this particular model, learning these really early levels is quite important. It helps parents understand why their children are behaving the way they are without projecting too badly on them, which is something that we all do. And this is actually, it's important that parents interact with their children because children are socially constructed, you know. If we leave a baby in a crib by themselves and just feed them and change their diaper, they eventually die. They have to have loving parents. And so in the process of being with these children, we inadvertently socially construct them to what we think they should be like. And that's a good thing. And sometimes we carry those constructions, those introjections along with us as well. So there's so much to know about babies, and I'm absolutely fascinated with this because everything is built upon these first 4 levels because they repeat again in the subtle tier. The same levels repeat again, and the confusions are the same again too. And of course, in an hour and a half, I'm not going to be able to give you a lot of information about these developmental levels, but I was hoping in this presentation to give you an opportunity to see a little bit about how confusions grow up and how they actually serve us. I'm probably one of the most confused people I know.
I'm married to a retired, but very gifted elementary school teacher.
Fantastic.
And watching her teach 3rd graders or 5th graders has been a blessing. At one point, I did a little research project. I got permission to take her 3rd graders out into the hallway and ask them questions about what kind of books they liked to read. And they almost exclusively liked magic. It met you by surprise.
But it's interesting because magic in the concrete tier actually upshifts into the subtle tier and manifests in a particular way there too, and even up into the meta-aware tier. We have certain magical things that we, they're subtle or they're very, very subtle, but magic doesn't go away at concrete tier. So anybody else have comments you want to make or thoughts?
Yeah, I want to jump in.
Okay.
Hi, Terry. Really appreciate your presentations.
Thank you.
Conference. I'm familiar with Ken Wilber and integral and spiral dynamics, and so really appreciating this additional perspective. I'm curious if you would point us to like any books or any writings. Like I know I've seen that you've written a few articles. Is there any that you would point to as like the best introduction for stages?
We have, on our website, anybody that signs up on our website, we have something called the Stages Roadmap. It's a very beautiful process that shows you just how the developmental levels come together. We also have a whole issue that was presented for on the Stages model in integral review. So it's got several hundred pages of information about different ways that people have looked at it. Some people critiquing, other people liking it. That's how it is. And we wanted to present all views. I have just, we have an article, a peer-reviewed article out from Helion on the statistical aspects of the Stages model now. And
there's a lot of great stuff. So just for that last point, how do I find that article on the statistical aspects?
It's referred to in the throughout the integral review. You'll find if you just look under integral review, the last issue, all of the issues are on stages, and it's footnoted, and so you'll find it there. Great,
thanks. Yeah, this is sounds like a lot of great resources. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hey, Terri. Nice
Hello.
to see you. It's good to see you.
Good to see you, Alan. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I had the special issue. I shared it with the whole Society for Consciousness Studies, over 200 people online recommended
Fantastic.
it. All I need is some time to read. But, so you understand that. So yes, I just have a really dumb question, because I haven't really done my reading. I'm hoping for the summer for that. When you say subtle, do you mean like astral plane and Akashic field, or do you mean it requires a little stretch of the mind and it's like subtle mathematics and reasoning? So how are you using the word subtle? I mean, this is a dumb question, but
that's not a dumb question. It's a question we ask because, in the state traditions, the word subtle means something different, because you can have something subtle at the concrete tier. Visualization is something subtle.
Yes, that's what I wanted to clarify.
Yeah. Yes, but when we are talking, but what people visualize at the subtlety at the concrete tier is all concrete. They'll visualize a tree. You see what I mean?
Yes, I do.
And then when we get to the subtle tier, the things they visualize are subtle. Like they visualize bright ideas. They visualize, and so we look at that's how we differentiate between them. And of course, it's a developmental model. It's not. Although we do think that there's some interpenetration between states and stages on all the way up, and of course we get that from Ken too in the later stages. So, yes, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have 2 more minutes before 1 more minute. So, Dimitri, do you have something to say?
Yes, thank you, Terri. I wanted to ask about question about adults. Do we have this as adults? Do we have these early stages as a sub-personalities?
Yes, we do have early stages where people are no farther along than 1.5, for instance. And some of these are developmentally disabled people. And there's some people that have been so badly traumatized that they never grew up. But for the most part, people who have, we have people who are at the 3.0, 3.5, the third person perspectives, and they have a very bad shadow that will toss them immediately down to 1.5 into that developmental level where they are very, very early, when they don't know the difference between a truth and a lie. You may know some people like that, where you don't know the difference between yours and mine. Where you
No.
Yeah. So we do have people, even they have terrible, terrible shadows that just have such a grip on them that it puts them down there whenever they get upset, which is often. And they literally can't seem to tell the difference between when they're telling the truth and when they're lying, even though they have some semblance of a third-person perspective. So shadow is a very big deal because we tend to fall back into these earlier stages when we're under any degree of stress at all. And if it's not taken care of, it can really, really cause a lot of disruption in our lives and in the lives of other people. So some of the people that go to prison, I've measured some people like that. You know, they're adults. They are still at a first-person perspective. They cannot tell a truth from a lie. And for all of the testing that I've done with them, I cannot see a third-person perspective. Others, I see a third-person perspective, but I also see when they get confronted with something that upsets them, they fall right back down into that early stages. So we tend to get those confused too. Shadow confused with what the developmental level is. Because developmental shadows actually have a developmental level, and it's not necessarily the level of development of your whole self. So, you know, that's what we do. We fall back into an earlier stage, and the earlier stage has a developmental level. So when we have an issue, when we go for psychotherapy, a lot of times, you know, we go for something that's bothering us, and that may be, the issue may be at an earlier level of development than the rest of us are. So those ego states, those subpersonalities actually are developmental. So that's something that I can share about shadow.
Thank you, Terri. And super amazing. I'm going to keep that in the replay. And for those of you who are coming back from the breakouts, welcome, and we're ready for the next step.
So happy that we had a chance to give you an opportunity to play around a little bit with this concrete tier, because everything is built on top of that. So I want you to hold your questions. I'm going to take us into the subtle tier now, and then into the meta-aware tier. And if there's time left over, please hold your questions, because I will answer Q&A at the end of this. So, all right. So I will share my screen again, and I hope that this Prezi behaves itself. If it doesn't, I'll see if we can get through it in another fashion here. So. Okay, so we're going to go into the subtle tier now, and so you can notice that we're going to be at 3.0, and I'm going to see if I can get this to expand so that we can get through the subtle tier. There we go. Okay, so notice that we've got subtle, individual, receptive, and it's an upshift from this concrete individual receptive. So this is a new identity. The first stage in each tier, people get a new identity. And the 3.0 is generally the time the kids get out of high school and are moving into college, and they get a new identity. And that is something that is really an amazing time for kids. Gratefully, there are other people on the other side of the divide between the concrete and the subtle, but they begin by being very confused about this. Now they can ask, who am I? They confuse the subtle individual identity that they're starting to get with the concrete collective identity, and they can't yet really tell where their ideas are coming from. They just know they're different. They still like their group that they've always been in, even though they're making new friends. But these ideas that start coming in are very, very individual, and yet they can't tell because they're so used to getting these ideas from the group, because everybody thinks about the same thing, you know, or are on the same level, but they're starting to get subtle ideas now. And these subtle ideas are very interesting to them, and they get them confused sometimes. So they confuse their subtle thoughts. They're learning to visualize subtle objects instead of concrete objects now. And so they can visualize, but they're having to make a distinction between concrete objects and subtle objects, and that's not very easy for them sometimes. So they're starting to take a third-person perspective. Their subtle identity is gradually detached from the concrete collective identity as they move through this 3.0 expert stage. And now they're kind of beginning to confuse the past, the present, and the future, because they understand the past, they understand the present, but sometimes they're seeing that these new, unique ideas that are raining into their heads that other people don't seem to always see or understand, what they're beginning to understand is that they are, they're seeing into a future in a different way, in a subtle way. In the concrete tier, the future is, oh, I've seen this in the past, and I want to do it. That's what I want to be when I grow up. But at this stage, they're seeing new things that they hadn't seen before and making decisions about what they want to do with it, even though they haven't experienced it yet. So this is a very interesting stage, and it is one in which they're starting to build a third-person identity. So now, when their identity is built, they move into this 3.5 subtle level. And those the identity fixes it at the end of 3.0, and now they can do something with it because it's active. So here, remember in the second stage in the concrete tier, they would confuse their concrete visualizations with reality. Well, here they confuse their subtle visualizations with reality. Let's see here. I want to back off a little bit here. They confuse their subtle fantasies and then they project it onto reality. For instance, they create a fantasy of the future in their minds, but to them it is absolutely going to happen. They become goal-oriented, they plan as if their fantasies are the truth, and oftentimes they get a pretty good version of it, but many, many times what they thought that they were, the place they thought they were going to get to is a different place than the place that they ended up getting. Or, so they're beginning to realize that just because they have a fantasy and make a good plan to get there, where they get may not be what their imagination told them. Also, they tend to marry their fantasy. So they find a spouse that they feel really good about. They project their fantasy on their spouse. They get married. They think they're going to live happily ever after. And lo and behold, they end up with a different person. And they have to learn to recognize who the real person is and not the fantasy that they projected on their spouse. The other thing they confuse is yours and mine. In the concrete tier, they confuse yours and mine because everything is mine. Now here, what they confuse is the ownership of subtle things, ideas, copyrights, patents, brands. And they know that concrete objects can be owned, so they don't confuse that, but they don't recognize that these very subtle objects are also owned. And this is one of the reasons why people get the law on their side to prove that their ideas are legally theirs, because they don't have the same kind of concrete ownership that, like a house. These ideas can fly around all over the place, and somebody can steal their ideas or steal their song or whatever it is that. And so they protect them with legal recompense, so that these ideas that they have, they can own them. And we write articles to prove that these ideas are ours. There's all kinds of ways that people use to make sure that these articles belong to them. Now they also fantasize on what they want in the future for their children, oftentimes. So let's look at this for a minute here.
Hey, I got a question. Where's this? Oh yes, that's your belly button. Belly button. Good job. What about this? Where's that? Oh, there he is. What does that say? Who is that? That's Elmo. Yes, that's Mo. That's Mo. Elmo. All right. What's that? Can you touch it? Yes, it's the carpet. Good job.
So that's enough of that. But you can see that this parent is really trying to plan a good future for her child, and has a fantasy of in her mind, and I could be projecting this on her. She may be doing this for another reason, but this child can't even talk yet, and she's teaching him how to read, which is a very interesting concept. And not to say whether this is right or wrong, but what do we fill our children's time up with? And what is the healthiest way for our children to live? And this might be just the right thing for this child in their future, and it may not be. But we have all kinds of ways of trying to support our children to be the best they can be when they grow up. So you'll find families that have a very great sports interest holding their children back for 1 or 2 years so that their child will be a foot taller when they're in the first grade, and then they can be better at sports in that particular grade, and especially when they get into high school. So we see these kinds of things happening all the time with this particular developmental level. So they confuse their subtle visualizations with reality, and then they plan as if they're real, and they develop the process to get there. So they confuse truth with lies in a way. If you believe that any subtle idea that isn't copyrighted, patented, or branded, if you believe that any of those ideas are yours for the taking, if you make ownership claims, are you stealing those ideas? So sometimes we have people who have a very good idea, they discuss it with a friend, the friend goes off and writes about it and gets it copyrighted, and because it hadn't been copyrighted before. Or patents happen that way, or they'll do a patent, that with a slight variation that is different enough so that they can make claims that's their idea. So these are some of the things that come up with this particular developmental level. And so it's not that people have a big, it's not an intended thing. It's and you don't often see this until later, but it is something that happens quite often. And so this is one of the reasons why plagiarism is put into place, because we don't want to see people stealing other people's ideas. But if nothing is written about it, even though you know about it, then is that stealing? This is a question we have to ask ourselves. The second thing is, if you believe your subtle visualizations are real, are you lying? Are you lying to yourself, or are you lying to others about your future? So this is a stage where you project out into the future, and you can have a very strong sense that this is what you're going to do and this is what you're going to be, and there are intervening things that people can't plan for and they don't really recognize will actually happen. So the third area that is an upshift from this stage at the concrete tier is that I can see you subtly, but you can't see me back. There is a sense that you can't see me back. So this sets up competition. If you are working away and you look over and you see that somebody has a very remarkable subtle idea, you can think, oh my gosh, this is really great. I'm going to put that into work into my business or my plans, and you can work away on it, not knowing that the other person that you got this idea from is looking at you and saying, oh, it looks like they're working with my idea. I'm going to have to hurry up and add some things to that, and so this goes on, and then there's these our whole economy is based on competition, and for the most part, the third person perspective. A lot of it is not having a clear understanding of how people are seeing us in return. We see what they're doing, and we get a very good sense of that, and things become a fad and that sort of thing. But we don't really get the reciprocity of other people seeing us back. So everything subtle that isn't claimed is mine, because there isn't a subtle you yet. So there's this one-way seeing that people at this stage have a tendency to act on, and this one-way seeing really does cause a lot of confusion sometimes. Because remember, if this is your truth, there's not a bad intention towards any of this. Usually it's all a positive intention. So here's the 4.0 stage. We have subtle, we have collective, and we have reciprocal. So notice we start with the receptive. Then we go to the active, which is the 3.5 achiever. Then we go to the 4.0 reciprocal. This is green, or sometimes we call it pluralist. Sometimes it's called individualist. Now, how could it be called both pluralist and individualist at the same time? That's a real strange thing to think about. Well, here is where they confuse the subtle me and the subtle you. They've already got the pronouns down, so they don't have to get the lingo down so much, but they have to get the subtle aspects of me and you figured out. And there's a very big confusion as they go into this stage. So they confuse the experience of social construction, that's agreements that all of us make together, with their own individual thought. And they don't realize how that collective thought influences your own individual thought. Oftentimes you feel at this stage as if things are very, very individually oriented in your own mind, and there is something that sometimes kind of magical that comes up here, and that is, I've been in groups where we're at this developmental stage, and they actually had signals. When a thought came up, everybody would raise their thumb if they thought if that thought came up with them at the same time, and they called it synchronicity. And actually, much of what was going on is that as the group was discussing the ideas were actually infiltrating people's individual minds, and they were adjusting their own individual thoughts to the ideas of the group. So they have an individual ideas, but they are part of the social construction of reality, even as they are individually engaging. And it's a little bit, this is a metaphor. This is a metaphor for okay, so perhaps you get the idea. There are a lot of individual birds here, and yet you can see how the individual birds actually get a collective action, how they're all influencing each other in these beautiful clouds of birds. And that's the way ideas work with people that are at this level. Every idea influences the other, and so they confuse collective action with individual action. And this is why sometimes it's called pluralist, because that's the collective action view, and sometimes that stage is called individualist, because that's the individual action view. So let's go to the last stage in this level, and we're at 4.5. That's an upshift of the 2.5. And if you recognize, we have a collective interpenetrative here, where the individual and the collective are so interpenetrated they can't tell the difference between them. And we have interpenetrative here. So how is this going to be at such a late stage? This is actually the teal stage, the strategist stage. So let's take a look at this confusion. So the subtle interiors and exteriors interpenetrate. Well, what do we mean by that? So they confuse the mature, subtle individual with the subtle collective. Now, the subtle collective at this stage is complex adaptive systems. Now, we think of collective as being a group of humans, but at this level, it is a complex adaptive system. In the lower right and in the lower left, it's contexts and cultures. So if you look at how the interior and the exterior works together, this stage will notice that every system that they have in the exterior is replicated on the interior, and they will also notice that every collective, collective in the head, collective in the body, group of subpersonalities, these interior collectives that we have, also is replicated on the outside, and it's sometimes not. These are interpenetrated with each other. I believe that this was spoken to by Roger Walsh about how it is the unhealthy interiors that we have that we project onto the world, and vice versa. We introject those exteriors into our interior as well. And this is a really complex process that goes on in us because we work with these subpersonalities all the time. The other thing is that this is the first place that people can see their projections. We project all the way down, all the way, at the very earliest developmental levels, people will project on others. But here, you can see the projection. So you will confuse at first the subtle self with the other. In other words, you might see that somebody is projecting on you, but you don't see when you're projecting back. When you get to the very end of this stage, you will notice that you had a judgment about somebody, and you walk down the street, and all of a sudden you realize that very judgment you had on that other person is in you. So in that way, you are interpenetrated with that other person. So they get this on this projective process. I am you in an interpenetrated way. They get that process very much because of this recognition of the projective process. So this is the second tier confusions. 3.0 confuses their subtle identity with concrete phenomena. They don't realize that they've got subtle phenomena that they're working with here, which pulls them out of the concrete tier. 3.5 is an upshift of the egocentric, and it confuses subtle visualizations with reality. They think their goals are true and real. It confuses subtle yours and mine. If they see an idea out there that hasn't legal protections, they will go ahead and develop it and work on it themselves, oftentimes with a positive intent, not intending to do harm. But this is not people deciding to be nasty about this. These are all just based on what they can see. They confuse subtle truth with lying. Their subtle visualizations. So they also can't see somebody else. They can see somebody else's subtle self, but they cannot see that other people see their subtle self. 4.0 confuses social construction of reality with my subtle identity. And 4.5 confuses the subtle individual and the subtle collective on the interiors and on the exteriors. So these are very, very strong, complex confusions. And in order to get through these confusions, you need to face them down, and that will put you into the next developmental stage. So this is the exercise I want you to do when we go into breakout groups. I want you to complete this section, this sentence. Love is, and do it in 4 rounds. Love is, do it in 4 rounds, and while you're doing it, notice whether your subsequent responses are influenced by the responses you have heard from others. And then if we have time, we'll debrief, but this is going to be a 5-minute breakout room. What I want you to do is watch how other people's responses actually affect your responses while you're doing this sentence completion. So one of you will start, and then you'll go around your circle in your group, and each one will answer the sentence completion the way that they would, and watch to see how you are influenced.
Excellent.
Okay,
so Brian is going to set you up in rooms. Go ahead and accept that invitation for 5, and we'll start the timer as soon as everybody has joined. All right. Well, we have 5 minutes. Sorry,
okay.
Terry.
That's all right. We can just have a conversation with amongst those of us that are left then. I'm hurrying through this in the hopes that you'll be able to see the upshifts. I'm having to just kind of move fairly quickly, but I'm hoping that you'll be able to see the confusions and how they can keep arising in each subsequent tier, and the ways that they become more and more subtle. And if you don't get it the first time around, you're going to have a second chance, because it's going to come again in this model. Now, other models may not have that, so remember that. This model might be helpful service to you. It might not be. So choose a model that works for you. Any questions or thoughts? Go ahead, Dimitri.
I was curious if you'd ever worked with twins.
I haven't worked with twins, but a lot of my research has been on twins, and so I have a lot of videos that I use with twins. The two little girls in the car, that was a set of twins.
I'm an identical twin, so I noticed. Yeah, so I think that we pushed our shadow into each other.
Yes,
and then it created this aversion to hanging out with each other. We weren't the typical twins. We were always in competition, so it's interesting to see.
And the exact opposite can happen. You confuse so much that you never really get your own identity.
Yeah.
So you have both. You have both the fusing and then the rupturing, instead of just having a normal sibling relationship. So it's a challenge for parents who have twins because of that. The projections and the introjections that go on that way. Any other thoughts any of you have? Those of you that are remaining.
Yeah, I work from the colors of the spiral, so it's very interesting how you give a kind of different explanation of it.
Yes.
And especially the development from green to teal is an interesting movement. And can you elaborate some more or explain again the difference of the confusions in green and the confusions in teal?
Yes, the confusions in green they're reciprocal. So green, or we call it the pluralist, some people call it individualist, they actually have the capacity to see the social construction of reality. And it takes a while for them to learn that, but when they sit in a circle, and I have a game that I actually have people play, there's no goal. I'll just share the game with you, and then you can play it and see and watch how this works. You can use it with 2 people, 3 people, 5 people. We work with up to 20 people. We have everybody pick a concrete object in the room, and then we just have each person take a turn and ask another person. It's a version of 20 questions. Is your object red? The thing is that each person picks their own object, and so you see it's a little bit different. So this is the individual part of it. Each person picks their own object, and when the questioner says, "Is your object red?" If your object is not red, you have to change your object to find an object that's red. Then the next questioner will say, "Is it on the right hand of the room?" If yours is on the left hand of the room, you have to find a red object on the right-hand side of the room. So you can see how the responses are shaping your selection of the object. You will actually get to the final object without ever setting a goal. Because at some point, there's nothing left except for the object that we've all agreed on, because we've eliminated all of the other objects. This is what happens when people are in a conversation. They'll go around and they'll adjust their thoughts. This concrete game, which is really quite delightful to play, this concrete game is an upshift. You upshift that into the subtle, and you're doing the same things with your thoughts. So notice how you're influenced with your thoughts when you're in a conversation. You know, you slight adjustment here, slight adjustment there, and before long, you all come out with the same answer if you talk long enough. And this is why green takes so long to get anywhere, because they have to subtly change their posture as they're engaging with one another, because they don't want to have a goal, because they've been burned by goals. They understand that goals are a subtle confusion, but they've had their fantasies and they haven't come true. Throw that away. Let's figure this out together. And so without a goal, they all come to the same object.
Yeah.
Yes.
We have
Okay.
1 more minute to bring people back. So
Okay.
I also want to mention that we have had some great questions coming up in the chat box, and maybe
Okay.
if we have time, I'll bring a few of those people live once people come back and you're ready for them. Okay?
Yes. The MetaWare tier is not going to take so long because we have very few people there. And the research we've got a lot of research in that tier, but it's much thinner. You can imagine the concrete tier has so much research, it's just so solid. Subtle tier has a lot of research, and it's not so solid as the concrete tier, but there's a lot of research. The MetaWare tier is by comparison to the other tiers, is very thin. So there's not as much to report there, but there still is material to report.
Well, we have people coming back now.
Okay.
I see smiley faces. They must have had some nice conversations.
About love, huh?
When you do this sentence stem experience and watch your mind and how it changes, how it takes off on the idea that the person's before you spoke, how you might have your own, but then it changes its shape because you've heard something that somebody else has said. This is what I'm talking about. When you watch your own mind shift as a result of what somebody else has said, you realize that you're part of the social construction, the collective. You're socially constructing truth with other people when you do that. So you can see how much more sophisticated that is. So let me know when we're ready to start. I've just checked.
Yes, we are ready to go. And I just have to say what you just said stole the words out of my mouth for what has been happening to me during this conference. This collective intelligence, it's like I'm experiencing all these upgrades.
That's
just
right.
Having the field. And I couldn't articulate that so well today, and you've given me words for that.
That's what it is. And it goes on above and beyond. So let's look at the MetaWare tier now. So these objects are awareness objects. MetaWare is aware of awareness, but at first it's very difficult to see that you're aware of your awareness because you don't have words for it, you don't have labels for it. So it's an individual stage and it's receptive. So things are pouring in you at this construct aware stage. So we'll go from the receptive to the active to the reciprocal to the interpenetrative. And we'll look at what happens. So a new identity comes up. And this identity starts in the transformation between teal and this construct aware stage. And often what happens is that there is you start becoming, instead of coming out of thought, you're coming out of awareness. And awareness is many, many times faster than thought. So you open your mouth to say something, and all of your thoughts pour out all at once. And you're talking over your thoughts, you're speaking and then you're interrupting yourself, or the thoughts are coming so fast you open your mouth and you freeze because you can't say the thoughts fast enough to say anything at all. So those are some of the symptoms that often come up here, because awareness now is where you're coming from. You don't know that, and a lot of people feel like they're going insane. So one of the confusions here is sanity and insanity, because they've actually, because of this strange experience of coming out of awareness, which they don't even know what it is, it sends them to an ortho, the hospital. They go to a psychiatrist to find out, or a psychologist to find out what is drastically wrong, or their family will send them. It's not it's important to make this normal for people when they get to that stage, so that they understand that they're just receiving thoughts through the channel of awareness instead of through the channel of thought, and they come pouring in, and it is just a really amazing thing. So they confuse their authentic self, which has all of these interior voices and exterior complex adaptive systems interacting, and then it also has the projections on reflection. And here is where the projections happen in the moment, because awareness can see those projections before they even come out of your mouth. So people will sometimes stop their projections before they start. Other people will use them as a way to build a relationship. I can see, I just saw that you were judgmental, and oh my gosh, I'm so judgmental myself, this is something we might be able to work on together. That's sort of an idea, only it can be much more sophisticated, but that is the in-the-moment kind of process that they have. And mind, body, spirit kind of comes together all at once, so that it's one thing and not three separate things. In the subtle tier, often mind, body, spirit doesn't come together at once. So this is some of the stuff that Construct Aware is going through. And at the later part of Construct Aware, they start stepping more into this awareness mind, and that awareness mind can notice that every word is a structure and that it is empty. It is just a label. It's a label, but it is empty until you put meaning inside of it. So emptiness really starts coming up on the interiors of these meta-aware stages. They do the same thing with boundaries. Oh, I've got all these subtle boundaries. Oh my gosh, what if I push them out? Oh my gosh, I'm going to this very advanced, very vast place. Oh, I can pull that boundary in. Subtle boundaries before this have always been stuck, or at least you could hold them in place, but people begin to play with these boundaries and they realize they're making these boundaries up. They're nothing but a story. They're making word meanings up. That's nothing but a story. Their whole life is nothing but a story that they've been making up all along. And so this is, at first there's a big confusion between the story of their life and the story that they're making up. So these are parts that are very confusing at first. And the very remarkable thing about this stage is that they're coming into a new tier, but there's not hardly anybody else on the other side that they can engage with so that they can normalize this. So that's one of the big things that we do. So now we're moving into the meta-aware individual active stage. It's a transpersonal stage. So now they understand that they're constructing reality. But they're very active with all of that. Oh, what can I do when I realize that everything is a construction? There's all these concepts that are just made up. But how can I enact that capacity in the world? And here's where they can put together the most remarkable models and different kinds of engagements. But here is a place also where they are making these models up, but they get so involved in them that sometimes they forget that these are just constructions. They aren't really real, that they're just a model. And so for a while, in the early part, there's a big confusion about, oh, I'm making this up, and look at the changes on the ground. Their models, their processes begin to reify, and they do become more a sense of reality. So they confuse their meta-aware witnessing with reality. They confuse the meta-aware truth, which is witnessing, and lies, which is your constructions. And then they can see their meta-aware self, which is at this point awareness of awareness, but they don't see that other people who are at the stage that they can, like another transpersonal person or another person at the transpersonal stage, they don't know that those folks can see them back yet. The thing about the 1.5, 3.5, 5.5 stage is that it's very, very lonely oftentimes because they can't see people see them back. But there's some very subtle competition that can set up even at this particular, this late stage. It's not like the concrete or subtle ones, but it's very much a very subtle kind of movement forward. So now we go to 6.0, and we have collective, we have reciprocal at the meta-aware stage. And this one is pretty rare. We don't have a lot of people here. We have quite a few at the 5.0 and 5.5 transpersonal and construct aware stage. But this is a universal stage. It's higher mind. And here they, remember when I said to you that these construct aware realizes that the boundaries that they've had are constructed and made up? Well, boundaries deal with space. At the end of the 5.5 stage, they find the same thing true with time. They see that push things way out in time and forward in time, and so they begin to get a sense of timelessness and boundlessness. However, they also still use the word infinity and eternity quite a bit because they confuse them. But infinity and eternity are developmental processes dealing with space and time that have a trajectory. So they are not like the timeless boundlessness that we hear about. Timeless boundless has no inside, no outside, no edges. It's very still. It doesn't have a trajectory. And this is where we're moving towards the timeless boundless in this stage, but still quite a bit of confusion about, well, is it into eternity and infinity and that's timeless boundless? No, it's not. So getting that confusion clear is a very important confusion to take into account at this stage. And lastly, we have meta-aware collective interpenetrative. Well, what in the world could that be? Well, this is the Illumined stage. This is where they confuse witnessing as a space from which you are viewing. Some people call this a Turiya type stage, except it's at the latest level of development. And they confuse that with non-dual awakening, because non-dual awakening doesn't have a view from anywhere. But this still has viewing happen, a viewer. So they confuse that witnessing as the space from which viewing has happened, and that's a very advanced stage. They also see the whole world the whole world of matter, the whole world of mind, and the whole world of matter, life, and mind. Those three worlds. So those are the confusions. So that's let's see how much time we have left. We don't have much time. I think that I can stop sharing my screen here.
There were some great questions that came up in the chat. So if you have a burning question still, I would invite you to go to the participants panel. I'm going to bring you live, Alan, since I see your hand. And then Vadim, you have your hand up still. Alan, you're next.
Hi, Alan.
Yeah, I just want to, this is wonderful. These higher stages, how you've expressed these. And I'll just be very quick. You know, I have something of a reputation as a consciousness scholar.
Yes, you are.
President of the Society for Consciousness Study Lifetime Achievement Award last year from Deepak Chopra. And I only mention this because finally I understand something that's going on in my life, and that is at least once a week I get a book or an important document that somebody has figured out the nature of reincarnation or the soul or how God, the universe, and everything works, and they dump these books on me left and right. I don't know what to do with them. Now I have at least some understanding of what structural level they're coming from, and maybe I can work out a strategy. I don't even have time to read them all. But yeah, I mean, there are people that are discovering very deep things and don't have any reciprocity in their understanding. So thank you for this, Terri. You've helped me out a lot.
Well, you are welcome. I've always enjoyed your work, Alan, so much. Yes, very much. Other questions?
Vadim.
I had more like an observation as a result of the second exercise we've done in the group.
Okay.
And the observation was that as soon as I started to think about the possible answers to what love is, I noticed that I was already influenced by how the task was formulated. I started to look for something that's original and that's not influenced by the speakers that came before me.
That does happen. That does happen sometimes. But then what you can realize is that other people are influenced by what you say, right? So you're still contributing to the social construction of reality. And
absolutely.
Yeah, so there's the collective part, and then there's the individual part, and sometimes the individual part is, well, I'm not gonna contribute to that. I'm going to contribute something very unique, and you do, and everybody says, oh my gosh, I learned so much, and they change their answers as a result of what you said. So it works both ways. Does that help?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. We have Vlad and Elena.
Yes.
Hey, Terry. It's so nice to see you once again after 2 years.
Nice to see you, yes.
So I have this more of a like clarifying question.
Okay.
The way I'm used to understand that individualist pluralist stage, or at least the way I interpret it from my own experience, which I think I'm going through that stage for a while now. I thought that the whole struggle comes from that awareness of social construction and individual thought influencing each other, and having this confusion and being like, okay, if this influences each other so much, how can something really free of influences come out? So I was just wondering, like, do you put it into that stage or do you put it later on? And you also mentioned that like that stage is influenced by the group, by the collective. Then I was wondering, how do you differentiate it from the diplomat stage, right? The conformist, which is also influenced by the group, but in a different manner, I guess. So
well, the rule-oriented stage is the one that is the downshift from pluralist. So it is before the conformist stage, rule-oriented, and they learn reciprocity on a concrete level. So it's like, if I talk for a minute, you get to talk for a minute. If I have a candy bar, you get half, and I get half. If I share this with you, then you share something else with me. They have to get the sharing down on a concrete level. Then you upshift it to the subtle level, and you get this much more complex process that goes on there. So that's the upshift. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that perfectly answers the second question. And as for the first, do you put this struggle of being confused by the very awareness of this inner influence? Is it put it into that stage or later on? Or
the struggle by understanding social construction, that doesn't usually happen right away at pluralist. When pluralists start getting these ego states that come up, or these subpersonalities that come up, and they also understand the social construction of reality. They understand that everything is made up together, but they still have this sense of an individual self. And at the pluralist stage, for quite a long time, it's really like they're inside of the social construction of reality instead of outside of it and looking at it. That's what happens at teal. But when you're inside of it, you're like a bird in that flock I was showing you. You're bounced around all over the place, and you see that you're being bounced around, but you can't stand out and witness the whole of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's confusing as long as you're on the inside, and some of it feels like synchronicity, you're not sure. There's all kinds of ideas about what causes this to happen. Mm-hmm. And when you get to the teal stage, you can back off and look at it and say, oh, now I see what's happening here. I can take a view on the social construction of reality. As Keegan would say, I'm having it instead of being had by it. Mm-hmm. Pluralist is had by the social construction of reality. I don't know whether that's answering your question or not.
That does. Thank you.
Okay, you are welcome.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our session tonight. Thank you so much, Terri, for a rich session.
I am so grateful for all of you. Thank you so much for coming, and I hope this has been beneficial. The thing that I hope is most, I just hope that the stages model and the things that we've learned from it is a tool for you to use, just a tool, and take away any part of it that's helpful, that helps you to understand. There's so much more than we do 5 or 6 day workshops on this model. So I hope it's a useful tool, and I just am so grateful to spend all this time with you. Thank you so much.